Well, greetings from the people who make traffic miserable here in the summer, who park in front of your driveways, and who crowd the beaches. It's great to be with you. My wife, Dana, is with me this morning, and first time for her to be back here in a while. And, okay, I got to orient myself. What's that clock mean? That I should be done in 27:05? I think Matt used some of my time. That can't be right. Okay. Well, I know you've been in a series this summer on the fruit of the Spirit. I'm gonna try to pull it together in some categories for you, and see if I can't give you a challenge to try to identify maybe one of these three categories that might be helpful for you. The material that I'm using is much borrowed from my new boss, Jay Kim, in his book, Analog Christian, where he takes the fruit of the Spirit and divides them up and uses things in application. And so I just want to make sure I footnote him and let y'all know how great he is. He's fantastic. It's an easy job to work for him, I will tell you that. In the 1940s, about 40 to 45% of the adult population of the United States all smoked cigarettes. But after World War II, sales began to decline. And as these sales began to decline, Camel, one of the major cigarette companies at the time, hired I hope nobody here smokes those, oh, somebody does. Okay. Not did smoke them. I probably fall in that category too. So Camel hired William Esty Ad Agency to try to increase their sales. And so they started a nationwide campaign called More Doctors. And what it was is this ad claimed that there were national surveys done, and in reality, what they did is they showed up at a conference where doctors were going to show up. A couple of hundred doctors is all that showed up. And they handed these doctors a free carton of Camel cigarettes and then said, "What's your favorite cigarette?" And then a majority of them answered, "Well, Camels." And so this ad agency said that the majority of doctors now smoke Camels, and you should too. Now, as you've responded, these ads are laughable, really, given what we know today and what we know about the long-term negative effects of tobacco on our bodies. These are really laughable. But I'm wondering if in 50 years or so we might look back on the introduction to the smartphone to our lives and wonder if we were being foolish. The average smartphone user, and this is not an anti-tech, just relax, you tech geeks, but the average smartphone user in the United States uses their smartphone 3 hours a day and unlocks this phone 150 times a day. That's the average. So some of y'all are unlocking it a ton. 84% of smartphone users admit that they cannot go a full day without their phone. 87% of smartphone users check their phone within the first hour that they're awake. And social media users, which we are mostly all of us probably, they will spend over 5 years of their life on social media. The word addict comes from a Latin word which literally means slave. And I wonder if there are some dangers to both our mental, emotional, physical well-being that digital addictions are happening, just like tobacco addictions may have been happening in the 40s. It's giving this digital age that we live in is giving rise to isolation, recovery out of this pandemic and all of the national issues that kind of piggybacked on the COVID pandemic have shown that our culture is not healthy and we have forgotten how to talk to one another. And I'm convinced that 2024 will be a very ugly year for us as a country. We are increasingly discontent. We are emotionally much more fragile. We make bad decisions and we waste tons of time. And I include myself in on that as well. In Galatians chapter 5, when you go into the fruit of the Spirit, what Paul does first is he lists the deeds of the flesh, or the things that Christians, if you're a Christ follower, will work against following after Christ. But that list might look something like this today: self-centric despair, comparison, contempt, impatience, hostility, forgetfulness, outrage, and reckless indulgence. This isn't the sort of life that we long for, but here we are. And with more access and more information that is available to us more quickly than ever before, we find ourselves discontent and quite fragile, and in many ways even foolish. So how did we get here? How do we think we get here? Well, it's Jay's opinion that technology has a deformation trajectory. And that's a really fancy way. That shows you the difference between me and Jay. Jay would say there's a technological deformation trajectory. I would say this is screwing us up. This is from a book by Andy Crouch called The Tech-Wise Family, and he talks about transportation. He explains it kind of like this: imagine transportation and the technology around transportation. It was first walking, and then we found that we could find animals of burden to help carry us. Take the horse, for example, and more than 5,000 years ago, 5,500 years ago, we began to ride horses. It required strength and skill. And then the automobile came along, and this is Carl Benz, one of the first automobiles in 1885, and it required strength and skill as well, but it was different than the horse. And then the automatic transmission came, and this is the Cadillacs. In 1939, Cadillacs and Oldsmobiles came out with automatic transmission, for those of you who are wondering. It required strength and skill, but much less. You no longer had to work a clutch. And from automatic transition, we came to computational cars that require even less skill. I mean, they'll tell you where you're going. They'll tell you how fast you're going. They'll tell you when you're going to get wherever it is that you're going. And they'll remind you that the tire on the driver's side rear is 3 pounds of pressure too low. And next, although it's arguments about how quickly it will come, we will have self-driving cars. And these cars will require no strength and no skill. And this slide of what it took to one-time travel, sitting on a horse, and all that it involved to care and train that horse to a self-driving car is kind of the process that happens to us living in a technological culture like we are. It's all well and good with cars, but about us, there are very few things that are valuable in our lives that are gained without effort. It is effortful participation that we need. Kind of looks like this in terms of convenience and accessibility and automation and ease, those kinds of things that we long for. And these are not bad things. We like them. I'm glad cars are easier to drive than the one in 1885. Mostly I'm glad they're faster, but I'm glad they're easier too. But as technology begins to do these kinds of things for us, especially in the areas of spiritual development, we begin to lose strength and skill, timeful participation, and practice over things. And you say, well, what's the problem with that? It's good to have cars that will drive themselves. It's not about cars. It's about a mindset that we begin to believe that our development as people will happen the same way that a microwave works. You pop it in, you hit 30 seconds, and away it goes. And I will tell you, Jesus being formed in you will never be microwave. Ever. So here we are, struggling again with this self-centric kind of weakness. What's the solution? The problem, again, let me say this very clearly. The problem is not technology. Don't you go out of this thing and tweet and say, hey, there's some old bald dude here telling us how we ought to get rid of our smartphone. That is not what I'm saying. I'm keeping mine. The problem is us. So we must seek a solution that's for us, not for technology, for us. We must find ways to reconnect with God and walk in the way of Jesus. And we must understand that it's not just for our benefit. It's not just so this room is healthier, although that would be great. It's for the world. Plan A in Jesus' plan to reach the world. Plan A, and there is no plan B, is you and I. It's us. It's us living vulnerably, authentically, the struggle of what it looks like, as we were led in song, what it looks like to try to love Jesus the best we can, knowing we fail him every day. So, you take the fruit of the Spirit, what do? Let's put them in three categories, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through these three categories, and as I do, I'm praying for each of you to have one category. Please don't be an overachiever in this. I know that you are at work every day, but just in this, don't say, well, I'm going to do all three. You can say one. And they're grouped together like this. They're grouped together around contentment, resilience, and wisdom. Galatians chapter 5, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And they fight against the list that I read earlier, where self-centric despair might be part of our life, and love instead will be developed. Comparison replaced by joy, contempt replaced by peace. Impatience with patience, hostility with kindness and goodness. Outrage with gentleness, reckless indulgence with self-control. If we could just apply some of this to the way we talk on the social media, it would be great progress. Cultivating these fruits of the Spirit isn't easy, and you've been spending weeks going through each of these, challenged to develop them. It's effortful participation, according to Paul in Galatians 5. Galatians 5 verse 25 says this, if we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. Keep in step is actually one word in the Greek text. It's a single Roman military word. And it was the word that they used when two or more soldiers would walk together. I think I have a picture of how this would look. They would walk together with their shields, and they became stronger together. My wife on her emails, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I would say it like this. None of us is as smart as all of us. That to surround ourselves in community of people where we keep in step, and especially we're in lockstep with the Spirit. And how do you know whether you are or not? Paul says it's by exemplaring the fruit of the Spirit. So, as we step into these three areas, just humbly ask, God, which area of application would you like me to pay attention to? Where should I listen to your voice? All right, first, cultivating contentment. Instead of self-centric despair, there would be love. Instead of comparison, there would be joy. And contempt, there would be peace. How do I get contentment in my life? 1 Timothy chapter 6 says this: godliness with contentment is great gain. Now you need to know something about the New Testament. Whenever there's an amplifier put on anything, like when it talks about Bathsheba, it says she was not just beautiful, but very beautiful. That's a clue that she was great looking. When it says that David was very thirsty, and that's a clue that he hasn't drank anything in a long time. When it says that godliness with contentment is great gain, it means it's a big deal. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. If we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. That's a challenge. People who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men and women into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Again, this is something else I'm not saying. I'm not saying that money is evil. I am saying that the love of money is evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. And if we had more time than we have, we could each probably tell a story of how friends of ours, family members and acquaintances, have chased after the dollar and found themselves bankrupt at the end. When it talks about temptation in this passage, it's talking about a trial, something that you go through. When it talks about a trap, it actually talks about something that's a snare, a net that can be thrown out over you. When the Trojan horses talked about it, it's talked about being a wooden pagis, this word for trap. And there are things throughout my life. I am so amazed at how susceptible I am to this. And this is what happens in my life. I will look for, let me use a current example. I will look for shelving for my garage. I will do a search on Amazon and I will see all the deals that I have to have, right? But I initiated it. The next time I open my browser, what happens is shelving is everywhere. Shelving is everywhere. This is the world we live in, and if you don't have a plan about how to deal with it, you're right, I gotta have that shelf. And that dangerous little button in our house called Buy It Now gets clicked more and more. How do you avoid this trap of material possessions that are kind of beating down on our contentment? Well, it goes on in verse 17 of chapter 6. Command those who are rich. I know you don't think you're rich. Let's just take a global perspective and just admit we are. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. And in this way they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. I know some of y'all are saying, oh, that's money, and who is he to talk about what I've got and what I've done? The motive behind Paul writing these words and the motive that I'm bringing them to you now is that you might have life that is really, truly life. And you will find that when you begin to gain contentment. Philippians chapter 4 says, I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. Did you notice that word learned? I have learned to be content. That you can actually make progress with this. You can be content because of three truths. This came from an old Jonathan Edwards sermon. You can be content because the bad will turn to good. The scriptures promise it. You can be content because good will not be taken away. And you can be content because the best is yet to come. That is what the scriptures promise us. So to learn this contentment, you've got to get a handle on how you view your stuff. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but you need to honestly take a look at how much you make and what you have and decide what resources need to go away and what resources you can share. And I will just tell you that if you're spending 100% of what you make on yourself, you're either way into the poverty line or you're incredibly selfish. Don't get mad at me. Read Jesus. Not only contentment, but the second challenge for us in this whole idea of gaining contentment is to be a generous person. To share what you have. It goes on to say in these verses here that I've learned to be content in all those circumstances. I've known what it is to have plenty, and I've learned the secret of being content in every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do everything through him who gives me strength. And then you just decide, begin to give away on a regular basis, and I don't even care where you give it to. Give it to some organization, hopefully your church if you trust them, or a nonprofit if you trust them. If you can't find anybody to trust, just do more work on it. And share some of your resources. 1 Timothy 6 says, in this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation in the coming age, so that they may take hold of what? The life that is really life. Some of you need to cultivate contentment. I need to cultivate contentment. The next one is to cultivate resilience. If you take the three gifts of the Spirit of patience, goodness, and kindness, working against impatience and working against hostility, you begin to cultivate this resilience. Another way of thinking about resilience is just thinking about grit. There's a wonderful book by Angela Duckworth called Grit, and she basically says that according to her research, those that are successful in life, the most important characteristic by far is not how they graduated with their GPA, not where they went to school, not their personalities. All of those things are fine and they're important, but the most important thing is the way they stay after a task, the grit that's behind it. She talks about it like this. She says, talent plus effort equals skill. And skill plus effort equals achievement. But the incredible thing there is not that there's talent and skill, but that effort counts twice. Some of y'all may be right on the edge of something fantastic. Don't quit. I used to be on a bike ride with a bunch of friends there on the other side of the hill. You know those guys that make traffic bad? And I was on a bike ride with them, and for several times I had done this ride, and I had started up this hill, but I'd never made it to the top. And I had always stopped right by this mailbox. I just remembered that mailbox because I would put my head up. I'd say, if I can just get to that mailbox, and I'd get to the mailbox, then I'd quit. And then I finally went on this ride with these guys, and we got to the mailbox, and I thought, oh my gosh, I can't quit. I'd be so embarrassed. So I'm just going to try to keep going. We only went like 25 more yards. And there was the top of the hill. I'd been up that hill 3 or 4 times, and I was only 25 yards away. And I thought I couldn't make it, so I turned around. In your life, there are going to be times when you don't think you can make it. In fact, for some of you, being in your seat right now is a victory. You didn't think you were going to make it here. Resilience, stick-to-itiveness, as we do these things, Christ is formed in us. Now, let me warn you, according to Romans chapter 5, the road to resilience or perseverance is a hard road. It says in Romans chapter 5, beginning at verse 3, not only so, but we also rejoice in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces what? Perseverance. And perseverance, character. And character, hope. We all want hope. But the road to hope runs through the town of suffering. And if you don't persevere in that, you'll lose the opportunity to gain your hope. Contentment and resilience And then finally, wisdom. The fruit of the Spirit, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. I think next week, although I won't give away too much because I don't know too much, but next week I think faithfulness is going to be a theme that wraps up some of your summertime with Matt as he comes, and works against the forgetfulness and the outrage and the reckless indulgence that our culture is known by and that technology tries to squeeze us into. We cultivate this wisdom. Now, when you hear the word wisdom, it's one of those things that's it's actually feels unattainable. So let me kind of demystify what wisdom is for you and foolishness. And here it is. A wise person is someone who hears the truth and adjusts their behavior to the truth. Let me say it for you again. A wise person is someone who hears the truth and adjusts their behavior to the truth. I tell you, I tell my grandson, CJ, if you don't do your homework, you're going to make a bad grade. So you should get it done. And he goes and he does his homework. And he doesn't make the bad grade. That's wisdom. That's being wise. Well then, Steve, what's a foolish person? Well, a foolish person is this. A foolish person is someone who hears the truth and adjusts the truth to match their behavior. Come on. You know them. You know them. You've been them. I go to CJ and I say, if you don't do your homework, you're not going to make a bad grade. And he says this, no, teacher ain't going to count. It won't matter. It's not going to matter at all. And then he finds out that he made a 0. And zeros on grade point averages are tough to overcome. He was foolish. I've been foolish. How do you recognize a fool? They have tons of excuses about why they do what they do and why that outcome that they don't want is not part of it. Wisdom is simply the proper application of knowledge for the most good. You have to cultivate this. You have to work on this. It is not going, listen, you can't just say a prayer and say, wow, God, like that bald dude. Hope he comes back in a year. But I think I'd just like that. Help me look like Jesus. And then you just say, I'm just going to keep doing what I do and not change a single thing. And you think that someday you're going to look up and say, wow, I'm like Jesus. I don't know how it happened. I just kind of showed up. It doesn't work. It's not microwavable. It's not going to be in a Siri search. Uh-oh, I hope she doesn't come up. Okay, good, she didn't. So what might you do? Well, first decide which of these, contentment, resilience, wisdom, which of these areas would be your area? Pick only one. If you say, well, I don't really need any help in any of these areas, then I would say go back and listen to the foolish part. Because I find that everybody I meet is always working on some of these things. What you might do is, if you know that there's a culture that you live in and the air that you breathe is working against character development, what you need to do is intentionally break from that culture. Okay? So, take a break. Turn it off. I know there's going to be discussions, if you don't have your smartphone with you, that you won't know the answer to the questions. Here's the wonderful thing. There are people in this room that are my age and older. We did our whole first half of our lives. We didn't know the answers to the questions, and we're still here. It's okay. It's okay. You don't have to know all of the answers. Spend some time in curiosity. Practice digital Sabbaths. You say, well, how do I get started on that? Take an hour a day. Take an hour a day and flip your phone off. There are controls in it. It'll go into sleep mode when you send it to it. Do it. Take a day a week. There's a biblical concept. Take a week a year. Go slow on purpose. Very difficult discipline for me. I drive in the far right lane on purpose. Sometimes. This is a picture of Ryujin. It's a dragon that is an origami. An origami is a folding of a single piece of paper into a particular shape. This is one piece of paper folded into this. You can watch YouTube tutorials if you want to do it. It took a folding time of 60 hours. The YouTube tutorial is 12 hours long. Now, I'm not suggesting that you learn to fold dragons. Maybe, though, there might be something that would slow you down. Delete things from your phone. I just asked my wife to help me with something yesterday or the day before, about what I'm going to delete from my phone. I'm not going to get rid of my phone. I don't know what I'd do without the maps. I mean, I've been here 10 years. I probably still couldn't have found it. Podcasts and listening to books, that's a very, very valuable discipline in my life. I don't intend to stop that at all. The camera and the video capabilities allow me to capture lots of my grandkids growing up, and I love those things. But the social media and the endless barrage of stupid video needs to become less of my life. Figure out which of these areas might be good for you. Decide this summer that rather than just learn about the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, all of those things, rather than just learn about them or even memorize them, maybe you might decide to reflect them. Contentment, resilience, wisdom. My hope and prayer for all of us is that in the midst of all of the digital distractions and the online noise overwhelming our senses, that we might become the sort of people who slow down as the world speeds up, who embody the peace of God as the culture perpetuates the chaos of the world. Sort of people who confront the discontentment and the fragility and foolishness of our world with the kind of contentment, resilience, and wisdom it's born from a Spirit-filled life. That you might go from this place and display to the world the fruit of the Spirit and a better path forward toward Christ, toward life, life in the full, and on into eternity. The Lord bless you and keep you. Lord, make his face to shine upon you, be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. In Jesus' name, amen.